Well, for one thing, I mentioned that the health department likes it because they're important in this process, and there's no doubt about where a food cart is going to appear. I think it adds a sense of order and continuity. It means that a food cart's customers can always find them. The idea of having 40 downtown food carts wandering around and being in a new site every day and probably competing to get into some of those sites is not something I'd look forward to. I don't know how Atlanta's planning to enforce it.
I just wanted to add to that. Growing up in that area and seeing it change over the years from mid-'80s or so, the streets are much different than Asheville with the university there. So there's some great potential for pedestrian traffic to just be funneled pedestrianly, not taking up street space, like having a wide truck parked in the street. It's just not possible taking up space here versus something like pedestrian mall where you have an opportunity to put something there and just choosing not to. It seems like there's potential there. This is just the way that you chose to do it with carts instead of trucks.
If we had trucks, there would be fewer vendors because there'd be less space.
The size, yeah. Okay.
We allow one person to have one food cart. And we do have a family that has a husband, a wife, a brother, and a father who have their own individual food carts, but they're not a chain. And we don't want some of the biggies to buy 20 food carts and monopolize the downtown. There was one year when we had 4 Mexican food carts. All of them had good food, but literally in the ordinance it says that the person who has my job has the authority to create a reasonable mix and balance of offerings. And so I don't put all food carts that sell similar products on the same block. One's over there and one's over there. And so they have their own separate customers who can switch if they want to. And also, when people call me and say they have this idea, I think the newest cart that's on the horizon is an Israeli cart. We don't have anything like that. Michelle was asking about a French cart, and we did have one for 1 year, but he was in the category of, there are some people who as soon as they contact me, I can tell it's a great idea, they have the know-how, I think they're going to succeed and contribute something to the downtown. And there are other people who I just have to spend a lot of time with them, and I don't want to operate their food cart for them, and sometimes those vendors don't make it. But when somebody tells me their idea, if it's something I haven't heard before, I immediately give them a lot of positive reinforcement. If let's say it's a 5th Mexican food cart, I'll say, did you know that we have 4 Mexican food carts already? What else is in your bag of tricks? You know, and so I encourage somebody to do something that's original if I can lead them into that direction. Well, a corporation isn't licensed, an individual is, and that actually hasn't happened. Corporations usually want to go big immediately, and I don't know how satisfied McDonald's would be to have one food cart on the mall concourse, although that might work. It's just that they couldn't have 2, they couldn't have 3, they couldn't have 4, they couldn't have 10. Does that answer? Okay. Some of them were on the committee, I think it was called Mall Concourse Operating Committee in the 80s and early 90s, and some of them were the ones who created the ordinance. And so on the State Street end of things, there's no conflict, although there are two churches on the Library Mall, and one of them, about 3 years ago, created a restaurant space in its basement, which is probably smart because they're making more money than they would if they had an empty basement. And so there's a Subway that went in there. You probably have, do you have Subway here? Anyway, it's a national chain, and that was their decision. And so the food carts are still doing fine. That Subway seems to be doing fine, but that was Subway's decision. And the entire length of State Street from the 100 block to the 600 block has no food carts on it. All of the arts and crafts people weekdays are also on the Library Mall. We would never put an arts and crafts vendor in front of Goodman's Jewelers. That doesn't happen. On Saturdays, the multi-use sidewalk becomes more of a fun thing. I think we'll have a line of arts and crafts vendors, and there are 2 sidewalk cafes relatively close to them. And the maximum amount of food carts that will fit, which I said was about 20. And Saturdays are different. The vendors are up and running by, say, 8:30. They're all supposed to be in their sites by 7:30, but let's say they're open by 9:30, and then they have to leave by 2:30. And if a sidewalk cafe wants to expand, into their weekday site, then they can do that then. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat.
Okay, what else?
Is there any animosity between the regular restaurants and food carts?
Here's a local example that I don't think it was very important. Our French restaurant on the outer square, which is called L'Etoile, moved from one end of the street to the other, and right next to them they opened a more casual eating place called Gray's. And right in front of Gray's on the sidewalk, we'd had actually a Mexican food cart, Taste of Mexico, which had been there for several years. And the owner of Gray's called me and asked if the cart really had to be there. And I said, well, no. And so I moved him down to the end of the block. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have some fountains there which have to be maintained. And so I had to move that cart again because he was impeding the entry to the sort of underground access to the fountain, and so I moved him somewhere else. But I can be flexible that way. And okay, yes?
Well, I was just
When I mentioned that when we were trying to fix late night vending, and I mentioned that there was a problem with congestion outside the large parking ramp, that we got complaints like that for a while, but we solved that problem. That's a health department thing. I think the health department requires a food vendor to be within a reasonable distance of a restroom. And reasonable distance is the phrase they use, and it's flexible. But it has to be reasonable. It can't be a mile away. Well, it would have to be available to the public, and if it were private, then that business would have to not mind. And some businesses do put up little signs, you have to buy something if you want to use our restroom. Yeah, during the summer, street vending in Madison goes on 24/7. And as all of this expands, I'm forced to spend most of the time in the office on the phone or doing emails or talking to people face to face. And my assistant, who joined me April of 2010, when I advertised that job, I made it clear that that person was going to have a necessarily flexible schedule that would include late night and daytimes and weekends and weekdays. And so he doesn't usually start working before about 10 or 11 in the morning. And there are some nights that he stays out late till 2 o'clock. And he cheerfully tells me when he's going to do late night. And that's, I'd say that's probably only about 3 times a month. but we're not having problems with late night right now. If we did, then he'd have to be there more often. Madison has a bunch of commissions and committees and boards, and their members are all appointed by the mayor's office. And they will often, someone from the mayor's office will also often contact me and say, this person has applied to be on the Vending Oversight Committee. Do you have any knowledge about her or him? And I'll tell them whatever I know. They usually go along with my recommendation. We had somebody who'd been on, in fact, her picture was there. She moved to another state, and so we lost her. And somebody from the new mayor's office, we have a new mayor as of April, who, by the way, this is the third time he's been mayor, so he's good at this. Anyway, I said, you know what? Two of the 6 voting members are city alders. We have 20 aldermen or women. The city is divided into 20 aldermanic districts, and so we have 2 alders on the Vending Oversight Committee. One of them was the first Asian person who'd ever been elected as a council person in Madison, and she decided not to run again. And she was from Vietnam, and she was very proud of that. Well, she was replaced by a white guy who's a student, because it's good to have a young person. But when the mayor's office called me to replace Toriana Petaway, I said, wait a minute, we want to keep this group diverse, and so let's not rush into this. Let's find some person. We don't have to be in a big hurry. The technical advice, and in many cases, if I know an opening is coming up and I've looked at somebody's performance and behavior and attention to detail and wisdom, then I'll say, there's an opening on the Vending Oversight Committee, and then they either go forward with it or not. Same with the technical advisors. And about the food cart review, it's similar, except I do choose them. Occasionally somebody recommends somebody, and if the person who did the recommendation is somebody that I respect a lot, then sure, I don't even have to meet that person. As long as I know that they're going to fulfill the responsibility of getting through those 5.5 days and taking it seriously, then they're on. And occasionally, someone will not use the 40, 40, 20. They'll go 40, 40, 40, and I can't use their score. There's no way to reinterpret what they really meant. But I have a little talk with them so they don't do that next year. No. That's the short answer. I guess you'd say I do that. And there was a cart that was a Chinese cart that had been on the Outer Capitol Square for 25 years. It was getting old and decrepit, and so, and that woman retired, and the cart was bought by her grandniece or something like that, and they got a new cart. And so I said, well, so what should we do with the cart? And I said, well, there was that cool dragon. They on the old cart, they had this 3-dimensional dragon. And I said, well, incorporate the dragon on it. And so the slideshow isn't on, but that cart was on it. They had it wrapped. I don't know if you've seen vehicles that are wrapped with some kind of art or photography, but they have a giant, brilliant dragon going all the way around it. And so that's what it's like. And there was another cart, actually, her brother-in-law, who wanted to start a cart, and it was, they wanted to do Japanese food. And I said, well, what are you thinking of calling it? And we were thinking of calling it Teriyaki Hut. And I said, that's actually not that interesting. Why don't you call it something else, like Teriyaki Fujiyama or Teriyaki Samurai? And so They did. They called it Teriyaki Samurai, and they have it wrapped with Mount Fujiyama and, you know, cherry blossoms and all of that. And if I detect that somebody is still not getting it, then I just spend more time with them until they're going to do something that's really beautiful, if I can get them to do that. Some people don't get that. Maybe I should mention that I have a degree in history of art. I'm so glad you asked that question. The Vending Oversight Committee is meeting tomorrow evening, and on this agenda I put, let's consider some maximum numbers of various types of vendors, and I don't really want to have more than 40 food carts downtown. The downtown does not need to be about food vending. It's about it's about a beautiful downtown. If you had 60 food carts, no matter whether they were carts or trucks in Asheville, would the downtown be as beautiful? I don't think so. You know, and so one of the questions on the list that I got is, should there be some maximum number of food carts? Yes, I think there should be. I would suggest that you start out small. I don't know if you have a long line of people waiting to be food truck vendors in Asheville, but if you start out with 3 or 5, see how it goes, and then expand from there. But just sort of study it for a while and see how it goes. No, the Athenian cart, I think those people, they have a couple of Greek food outlets. One's in Madison, one's in a town, I think it's called Wanakee. And they drive the cart from Wanakee. I think it's a good 20 miles, but I think it's still in Dane County, D-A-N-E. Madison is in Dane County. Oh, and does that answer your question? Okay, so about 3 years ago, well, we used to have a city health department and a county health department, and about 3 years ago, they merged. So now we're all working together, and that works better. No, I don't know if I mentioned it, but they do, and it's general liability insurance, and it has to name City of Madison as additional insured so that both parties are covered. And nothing has ever come up. The latter is correct. They're in a certain spot for a certain number of hours. On the mall concourse, you can be in place from 6 a.m. until midnight, but they're pretty much lunchtime food vendors during the week. And then we have late night. You can also get a license for late night. Let's see if I can make this comprehensible. For a mall concourse food vendor, it starts at probably about $2,000. A Wisconsin tax number, which means if you're making money in Wisconsin, you have to pay taxes. It costs $20 or $30 for a year. You have to have a street vendor license for each person who's handling money, and that's $150 a year. You have to have a mall concourse food vendor license. That's $850 a year. From the health department, you need 2 licenses. The first year, it's $560 each for the mobile-based kitchen and the cart itself. The mobile-based kitchen is a restaurant-caliber kitchen where they have to store and prepare their food. You can't just do it at home in your kitchen. And so the first year for the 2 health permits, it's something like $560 each. General liability insurance for a food cart is usually over $1,000, and so it's probably between $2,500 and $3,000. That doesn't include the cart or the rental of the kitchen, unless they happen to own the kitchen themselves, which some of them do. Is that okay? Judy Daniels had brought that up when she visited Madison a few weeks ago, and I think you probably need to come up with your own solution for that. Steve had driven me around, and we walked around some, and there's a park where I think some vendors are showing up. As I said, in Madison, our vendors have to be on a paved surface because we want to protect our grass. I think that's probably a local decision. Steve had also mentioned that there could be possibly a parking lot on privately owned property and or publicly owned. What's that place that has the vendors outside?
Grove inside? Woolworth.
No, outside.
Oh, Grove Arcade.
The Grove Arcade has, several arts and crafts people, and it's the Grove Arcade is owned by the city, but it's the arcade occupants who they have a sort of juried process in order to choose the arts and crafts vendors that are right outside. Is that kind of getting off the subject? But I think the bottom line on that is that Asheville needs to discover something that's going to work for you. Unless you want to bring in the parking lots or something else and just do it your own way. That's a good question. On the mall concourse, the only individuals who may be licensed as street vendors are either food vendors who are serving hand-prepared meals and drinks, or arts and crafts vendors who are personally crafting what they're selling. And so it's hands-on. And on Saturday mornings, I'll mention that on the inner square, all the farmers and the growers and ranchers and nursery people, they also have to be hands-on with what they're selling. So downtown is all hands-on. Okay, so outside the downtown, there could be something like that. We haven't had anything like that. And I think other issues come in, like health department. I think health department is in charge of tattoo parlors and things like that. Shoe repair, I don't know. I mean, it's never come up. But I would say if you think it's something that Asheville doesn't want, address it now. Don't wait until it starts happening. Not in Madison. But if that's something that might work in Asheville. $1 million. Yes, and then the smart ones incorporate the tax into the total price, and the ones who want to work harder get a calculator and figure it out for every sale. I don't know. The university, I should say that the university is actually its own universe. And there are many City of Madison streets and sidewalks that encircle blocks of the university. And so when I mentioned that Southeast Campus vending area, that's one of those places that the vendors are on the sidewalks that are immediately outside student classrooms and university buildings. But the university isn't really involved in street vending. And I've worked with literally someone from the chancellor's office in making that Southeast Campus vending area work for both the city and the university. But about the economic impact, I don't think people see it that way. I think somebody asked a written question about, well, what are the good things about it? The good things about it are that they're fun, they're something you want to do on a sunny day, on the days you don't want to sit down in a restaurant. I eat at food carts sometimes, and sometimes I eat at restaurants. But the economic impact, I couldn't really tell you. I don't know if there are really very sound statistics on it. They're often on the streets leading toward the state capitol building. And we have a huge food festival. I guess you have one too. Our food festival is around the outer Capitol Square, so that it's a continuous line of vendors on the outer square, but they're not everyday vendors. They're usually tents that are occupied for that weekend by restaurants. And
So the festivals are like not on the mall concourse or the library concourse?
the library mall has some. We have India Day on the library mall. We have Harvest Fest on the library mall.
Do your vendors, your regular vendors go ahead and set up?
Good question. We have something called exclusive use, and that is there can be a maximum of 10 exclusive use events, which means the regular licensed vendors may not be there. Most events have something called suspension of, it's not exactly suspension of the rules. Oh, it's suspension of the handcrafted requirement on the mall concourse. And that is that we have an event called Cars on State. Judy saw that. And with Cars on State, there are t-shirts that are associated with that year's Cars on State event that anybody can buy, but that's only for that day. So the rules can be flexed to accommodate a special event, but not bothering the regular vendors. They're only on Saturdays now. One of them, Johnson Brothers Coffee Roasters, used to be open during the week. He also does wholesale, and so he eventually decided it was too much to juggle, and so we don't have it during the week. Monty's Blue Plate Diner just joined us, and they do serve coffee. They're on the library mall early in the morning, so that's something new, and I almost forgot to mention them. It's anywhere that works. We have a U-Haul at parking lot where the vendors, if you remember the picture of the 3 food carts during the winter, that's a U-Haul at parking lot, and they pay, I asked, they pay $83 a month to be there. Yes, Zen Sushi stores their cart sort of behind their house. They own a house. I'd say every year, 1 or 2 or 3 change their minds and never open at all. Or, and that is, I'll have several people who show a lot of interest and then I don't hear from them again because they're starting to realize how much commitment this takes. And then people who make it through the food cart review, every year there are 1 or 2 or 3 who just don't open the next spring. But last year that was from 44 applicants. We have plenty. I mean, if somebody wants to move on and change their mind, that's okay. Then it's taken to some safe place, probably the base restaurant, and emptied there.
So they pack their water, their wastewater?
Yes,
okay.
Not in the gutters.
Okay.
That isn't tolerated. They are. It's just that it's not usually worth it. No. Only people on the mall concourse go through the food cart review. You don't have to go through it for Camp Randall or for Southeast Campus vending area, or if you're just a simple street vendor on Williamson Street. But those people don't make as much money. On the mall concourse during the week, no vendors are supposed to come and go after 11 a.m. or before 2:30 p.m. And that's because that's the lunch rush. And once it subsides, then as safety allows, they can leave. And on the outer Capitol Square, that's less of an issue. Most of them leave by 2:30 or 3 because lunch is over and everybody is back in their office.